How do we overcome these obstacles as a multi-agency effort to go into communities with a more holistic perspective and engaging that community to be a part of the process? Something that today will show, and I think a lot of that is just the fact that we are missing connectors to get the connection from everything that everyone does with good intention to that community level or that regional level, so that the planning efforts stem from that ground up. And I think that we all have some wonderful success stories that some were shared at the last roundtable. Today we're going to make that discussion a little more active. So after the video, we'll kind of go through a process of how to build a project around one little concept and bring a solution-based approach with a holistic perspective to a community. We do this a lot. We have lots of great minds in here, great ideas. How do we make it happen? What does it take that we're missing that is not changing the way we do projects in rural Alaska? One of the ideas is to merge funded active projects. If there's 5 projects happening in one community, how do we bring them together so that they build on each other, so that they're not siloed, and you have something we've heard is a competitive workforce. If you want to engage the local community and you have 5 different agencies at the same time, you're all fighting for the same workforce. How do we make it so that we bring this in a phased, my idea is like something phased where you build on each other, so you give somebody a job for the whole season, not just everybody following this one little opportunity and you're all overlapping, tripping on each other, trying to stay in the school. The principal's going on vacation. I mean, we all deal with this in everyday life in rural Alaska. And then how do we identify and build on a single project component? We talked about at the first roundtable an ANTAC project that is happening in Kivalina. That was just a topic discussion that how do we build from a toilet and go add ventilation, add weatherization, deploy renewables, a skid foundation, so if they have to relocate that investment, they can take it all with them. So that was an idea. So we're going to solicit for ideas, project ideas from you. If you think of a project that your agency is doing that this might fit into this concept, then we'd like to hear it tonight. To make sure you hire a facilitator that understands both perspectives, from the agency perspective and from the local perspective. Be it a local person or a regional person that understands that you can't always find that facilitator or that organizational component in a village. Sometimes it's just everybody's already got those positions filled. They're wearing many hats. Why task them with one more hat? How do we make this easier for local communities to engage and be part of the process? The other thing is to develop an action plan of how we make it happen. So these are just things we want you to start thinking about. I'm going to let Jack go through the building on we're using a house as the topic tonight, and Jack's going to go through, I'll do the slides and you can just talk.
Great. I think you all get it. The idea is that we can't silo one piece of a problem without addressing the whole picture. And that's not just in rural Alaska, it's really in all our communities. We've got to look at the different parts and try to leverage the talent that we have and the activities that are going on so that we can complement each other's activities rather than separate them. So we were just sort of illustrating a house because that's the world I come from, and I think all of you live in houses or want to or would like to, and would like to be able to afford them. And we know in rural Alaska we have some real problems with indoor air quality and energy efficiency and all of those pieces related to the housing stock that's out there. So when we look at the house, what can we do? And we know, go ahead Jackie, we know about this. We know that weatherization can occur, and of course one of the problems that our great AHFC has had in the weatherization folks is lack of funding to do the job right the first time. They come in with smaller budgets than they'd like to see, and they get done what they can. They've done remarkable work. But if we're gonna be working on this house, what can we do, or this structure? So we need to look at the whole building and how we dramatically lower the energy use in that building, dramatically raise the indoor air quality and the health, AJ's work, and the kind of things that we can do to make it a healthy place to live. And then again, how can we be creative about the financing to make this happen? And if, in the case of a village that may have to relocate or have a drastic change in the location of the homes, can we be looking at foundations that will address that? In areas where we're having permafrost degrading and other problems, how can we get a foundation on that house that's going to last for decades? As Brian was saying in the film, we can do it right. We know the kinds of things that we need to do, but we often can't afford to do that, and we can't do it at the same time. And water and sewer, same piece. We're going to have to start looking at systems, and that's why we sort of built on the toilet idea, because the cost of the infrastructure we've been putting in is higher than what it would cost to build a new home, just to bring water and sewer to a house that's failing in some cases, in a community that can't even afford to run that water and sewer system. So we really have to look at that piece. And energy. There's so many things we can do. What Pilar talked about in that brief film. Just, there are systems, there are technologies developing where they can complement the existing infrastructure, or they can be sized properly so that that infrastructure, as it's being replaced or supplemented with the great work that AEA is doing and the cooperatives that deal with electrical production, that can work out. The other biggest piece, of course, is the community itself. How can that community be engaged in workforce training over a period of time, over a period of years? As Jackie was saying, don't go in all in one summer and try to do this, but develop thoughtfully staged progression of activity that creates jobs in that area for years. And everything that's done and the dollars that are being spent are moving toward a sustainable future for that community. Transportation, of course, a big one. How is that addressed in all of this? Getting materials there and transportation once the community is, or when the community is established. Sanitation, this is a project that Mike's working on. This is a kind of toilet that we used in a project we had in Muffluck that separates the solids from the liquids and dries them. How can that work? Very affordable. The people in Muffluck are happy with it. We hope that in this project Mike's got going and others have going, that we can come up with solutions like this that are affordable and work for the community. This includes also water. How do we deal with water in those areas? How do we take care of the environment in an affordable and holistic and a enduring way, something that's not going to be a burden for the community. So that's starting with the house, sort of.
Okay. So Mike, you want to add?
Do I? Well, okay, so we started with our little project in discussing what it evolves into and what would provide the greatest value to the community of Kivalina and anybody else that was getting similar projects. If we here could actually figure those out, the community would benefit, the agencies would benefit, the funding would go further, all of our efforts would work towards a solution as opposed to spending more money and creating problems for not only for the agencies in their development of projects, but for the community as the result of those projects. So that's a challenge. It's because we all have restrictions in funding, and we have restrictions in how we can, the seasons of construction. There's many problems that have to be overcome. It is not simple, but the benefit of it is evident, and in this case, we need the partnerships of everybody in this room and others to make sure that what little investment we make actually has a much bigger benefit. So,
Okay, so this is just a little holistic perspective of how I think an approach that hasn't been done when we have two very drastically different cultures, and our state is very unique. We have more than two. We have so many native cultures, and then we have Western culture. Now, there are benefits to both. What I think really needs to happen is we need to marry those cultures together in order to seek the solutions that will benefit in the, for a sustainable period of time. When you bring in water and sewer into a community and it's not climately appropriated designed for that climate, then you're going to have failing systems. And throughout Alaska, you see that. And those systems are just repeatedly band-aided to work for another season because they only have that 3 months to fix them, and then everything's an emergency. So to me, and I think Sally will probably agree, that planning effort, you have to take way too big steps back and look at it from a holistic perspective. As far as funding and agency deadlines and timelines, the Department of Energy was so willing to work with us when we had these hurdles with the EECBG program. And I didn't know much about dealing with the federal government when I stepped in to help. But the thing is when you asked, they were willing to work with you. So I think we get into this mode of we're so busy working and trying to follow that deadline on that piece of paper that we forget that there might be flexibility. So if we have agencies that come together and say we'd like to phase these projects out over a 5-year period, engage workforce development and planning at the beginning with that community engagement, and then this is our plan forward for 5 years. This is how we're going to build upon this over time and strengthen this community's sustainability, lower their energy costs, and provide them with safe, healthy sanitation and homes. I honestly think that we're not going to get the pushback that we automatically think we're going to get. I think as a state, we're unique. We're constantly struggling and asking for adjustments. We're not Arkansas, we're Alaska. So, we hear this a lot, but we kind of fall into that mode of just surviving and going through our daily jobs. So how do we take these holistic values and engrave them into what we're doing and making the value of that homeowner or that user of those systems more important than the timeline? They're not a deadline. All they know is we want healthy water, we want healthy sanitation, we want a warm home. I know many communities, I know family members that would rather be at work than at home because they're paying $1,200 a month for heating oil. I think I'll just keep it cool and work late. Get the overtime to pay that bill. So when you're in that position of choosing between feeding your family and heating your home, it really becomes a social behavioral problem because everybody struggles. So you're creating more oppression instead of a blessing of sanitation. So how do we work together to alleviate some of those obstacles and move forward? And this is where everybody gets to engage.
Jackie,
Yes.
can I suggest that there's maybe also another holistic model that folks should think about? And it is that middle ring of the government and the stakeholders, if you will, that there's an opportunity for us to work together holistically outside of the community to organize ourselves a little bit better. So as an example, ANTHC has a list of projects they're going to do. AEA has their list of projects. Do we ever compare them to see if we're sitting in the same community at the same time and that the projects that AEA is approving are acknowledging that ANTHC is going in, or are the regional housing authorities sitting down? So, there is an opportunity to create another interlocking, holistic approach at the state level, if you will, and then even at the regional level, that then helps provide support. We were just having this conversation because we're going to be rolling out START Round 3, which is our holistic approach to community energy planning, right? And one of the things we commented on was we have all these stakeholders who come in and participate, ANTHC, AEA, AHFC. But because sometimes we haven't done some of that alignment amongst those agencies, they're not necessarily bringing everything to the table that they could be bringing. So there maybe is an opportunity to look at some other holistic views of what we're doing and where, and trying to align outside of that community. So when we go to that community, we're already aligned. We don't make the community align us, because that's part of the challenge we have. We're expecting these villages to align us. And we maybe can be aligning ourselves. So when we go to the village, we're already aligned. And we already know what we're doing, and who's doing what, and when they're doing it. So we can stage our development efforts, and therefore our funding that way. And we take the burden off of the village, many of whom don't have the capacity to manage us the way we need to be managed, honestly, right? So I would suggest that maybe another view and a separate additional conversation is our own interaction and alignment prior to working in the community.
Okay, so right before Mike, I'm gonna just leave this up here, so it was just kind of a thought process of how we could do that, to identify a potential project, and then identify an action plan, develop one that has a multi-agency approach. So then you go into the community and engage that community, and you have a list of projects that are coming next year or the year after. So, and then through that, you create an agency network and an organizational chart, so that now you could start creating that project flow chart, so you're not stepping on each other's toes. So you're building on projects that go into that community, and then maybe, you know, and I don't know how anybody does their project management as far as organizing and choosing what village goes first, but maybe start rearranging which one's next, so that you can benefit from somebody else being there. Go ahead, Mike.
I just wanted to dovetail off of Pilar there, because we've had this issue out in our region, in the ABCP region, where we've seen multiple organizations come out. For instance, Village Safe Water would come in and put in, or we would go out and put a road in, then Village Safe Water would come in and tear the road up and put it in. And we have seen this happen again and again. So at ABCP, we went and we've organized through Mark's department, Energy and Community Plans. We are now all 48 villages, 56 tribes, have putting community plans together to know what's out there 3 to 5 years, so we know who's going to be there. If it's going to be ANTHC or some other entity. We've started this in ABCP through the consortium. It's getting to be well organized. So Pilar, this is something we started, and I encourage everybody else to. And to come off of what the last Fairbanks meeting I had mentioned is, work through the consortiums, also work through the tribal government, but consortiums, we have some valuable information for everyone, and we're willing to share it every time.
Anybody else? Yes.
Just a comment, and I don't know how much it's used these days, but back in the day, there used to be a Rapids database maintained by the Department of Community and Regional Affairs that basically did exactly what's being talked about here, and I think it is still in existence, but how much it's used is questionable. So I think rather than reinventing the wheel, I would first look at the Rapids database and go from there. It's been around a long time. It's got a lot of data in it already. And secondly, I think the idea about coordinating federal and state agencies is a good one. I can speak more to the state aspect, in which there's a mechanism that really can bring state agencies to do the kind of coordination you're talking about, and it's an executive order by the governor, which would supersede all state agencies. Now, that doesn't do anything for federal agencies, because they have their own criteria and funding cycles that may or may not fit with the construction season or the state fiscal year. But at least through the Rapids database and an executive order, you basically have corralled, one, the list of projects going on in villages, and two, coordination of state agencies.
So Bob, you're absolutely right on this Rapids database. I mean, that was created years ago for the same reason that we're talking about it today. That is, unless you know a project is going on in a community, you could never even understand that you're maybe in conflict with some other work. And so this was just a simple database, voluntarily populated by the agencies. Where are you working this year, or next year? It had some good response depending on the agency, because it was entirely voluntary. There was no directive from anyone to say that you had to do this, but it was maintained on a shoestring. There's really no budget sufficient to keep it maintained, but frankly, it would be in all of our best interest if it was rigorously maintained. And it recognized the problem years ago, like you said, but we just haven't really
So-
put a lot of resources into it.
So, you know, we all know that there's success stories and there's not so successful stories out there. I never say mistakes because we always learn something. What have we learned from something that was implemented as a good intention? That it needs to be managed, that it needs to have a budget and somebody facilitating it, because the value of it needs to be risen. Be it by the governor's office. I mean, you're all state and federal agencies that have the power to request things like this. The benefit to all of you will only filter downward to the regional level and to the local level. So that is kind of the whole objective of this discussion, is to identify those things that maybe we could just re-energize, but with this group right here, I guarantee somebody's gonna listen. You guys have the ability to make change happen. And our state is unique in that sense. Most states don't have this kind of friendly discussion. Sit around and talk and share ideas. This is a unique place that we live in. And I think that we just need to readjust our priorities and not reinvent the wheel, but re-energize it and maybe tune it up a little with some good ideas from even the federal side. Because if we start aligning these things and create a more balanced approach, it's gonna benefit everyone. It's gonna alleviate some of the stress at the regional level, because now they don't feel like they're building beautiful roads and they're getting torn up the next year by NTHC.
We've done
But,
a little of that, yeah.
you know, and then you also, because you start working together and talking, creating that heartbeat. We're all siloed like this, all our projects are here. Now we're creating this heartbeat, so to speak, because we're talking to each other. Now you start creating an energy that is trickling down to that community level, which we all want that community to feel ownership and involved. You want them to feel like the benefit of this service that's coming is truly a benefit. It's not gonna be a financial heartache 10 years later when the rates have quadrupled. When they couldn't afford it then, now they have to try to afford it now. We're having failing systems just because people can't pay their bills. It's a huge problem. But if we come together and then stimulate the economy, you're creating jobs, so now they can't afford the bill, and you're creating this balanced, cohesive approach that's not gonna be so stressful. Now, it's not a perfect world, so that won't ever happen perfectly, but.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with somebody or some organization being responsible for it. Because as an example, at AHFC we have a program called the Rural Teacher, Health Professional, and Public Safety Housing, where we've built hundreds of units out in rural Alaska for those professions. And it started out just to keep teachers in a community. When you've got a small community or a village that's having a teacher leave every single year, and these students have to learn a teacher every year, and the teacher has to learn the students every year, it's gonna be very difficult for them to succeed. Well, we quickly learned that as rural schools were being built, and heavy machinery was out in that village for the first time in many years, and maybe who knows when it would be again, there would be a benefit financially for us to work to make sure the same construction season, potentially housing units could be built along with that. And what that would do is save us enough money that there may be an extra project that year. There's an extra community that year that we're able to get to. That community gets the units, has the benefit of having teachers stay, having a VPSO stay, that wouldn't have happened if there hadn't been the coordination in a different part of the state. And in that particular situation, the responsibility is on us, because we want to make sure our money stretches as far as it can stretch to take as many communities as possible. But I really think in each situation, there's gotta be, the buck has to stop someplace, where somebody's saying, okay, I'm gonna make sure that we're connecting everybody we can to make sure that something's not dropping out.
Yes.
I think that partnership, when we talk about partnerships, one of the things that we wound up doing when Commissioner Joe Masters was head of the public safety, he was able to recognize that first responders with our BPSO program, lacking offices and homes, came to ABCP. We sat down and formed a partnership where we would secure some funding and build these offices through our HIP program, and it was successful. We built 10 offices. I don't know how many homes we built, but it was a success where recognizing that the both entities had a need, and we were able to come together, and it's building those partnerships, and I think that's what you're talking about a lot in this room.
Yeah, so of all this conversation, is that what we feel we need? Is a partnership? Do we need to just try to re-energize a system that might be successful with a little tweaking? I really want to hear what, from the economic development side, I really feel like if we had multi-agency input over a phased period of time, that projects could really regenerate those communities that need that economic stimuli. And I know that some regions have that economic development funding to help pay for this type of, bringing training to their regions. So, I want to start hearing what different agencies have to say. If you have a suggestion or an idea that will kind of help fill in this chart, how should we do this?
A lot of that revolves around community planning and looking at where's the community now, establishing the baseline, where do they want to be in 2 years, 5 years, so on. And really looking at, most communities have an idea that they're at least on the blocks for some new school or new community building or whatever it might be. They have an idea that these things are in the pipeline. One of the things that doesn't necessarily get translated is, say, the weatherization crews are going in there. And there may be opportunities if they check in with that community planning when they're planning on going in, then there's an opportunity to begin to link it in. But without any kind of community plan, this is really kind of just shooting in the dark at a lot of different things, because we could be as coordinated as we wanted to be outside the village, but if the community itself doesn't have a plan and know what their needs are, it's kind of a moot point.
I just want to say, I think the right hand doesn't talk to the left. We've established that. State agencies don't talk to each other. Federal agencies don't talk to each other. Neither of them really sit unless they are invited to something like this and talk. Each region, each village needs a champion that can try and pull things together. I'm the arbiter for my region. I try and pull in AEA, USDA, RD, DED. I try and pull as many, Department of Energy, Office of Indian Energy, and try and pull as much of these people in. Ooh, Volcano's got a biomass plant going in. Holy cow, let's see what I can do. I can pull in USEDA, USDA, I can pull in AEA, and so I'm trying to help them coordinate resources. So my point is that you need a champion that has their finger on the pulse of what's going on, what's out there in funding, what's out there for projects coming down the pike, what's popping up in the future, what possibly could be a stumbling block, because this village and this village don't get along, and we gotta get somebody in there to be a liaison. So you need a champion that knows the turf, that are, I hate to use the term, boots on the ground in that area, and know the folks out in that region. And that would be my suggestion, is to find someone who, in the position that I have, that can bring this together to help out everybody and kind of coordinate it.
So like at the regional level, have one regional contact that would kind of be that facilitator for projects in each community. Now, something community planning, I work on regional energy planning. This has opened a platform that really this discussion came from. Traveling to villages and listening to communities and community members talk about energy, it affects everything about life. And I really didn't think about that until I was in their shoes. You walk through their homes and you look at everything about this community is connected to energy. The water and sewer, transportation, the schools, the hospital or the clinic, everything about their home is based on energy. So I know DOE is going through the efforts of community energy planning. Maybe this is something that could dovetail, and for those communities who don't have the human capacity to have community planners, they could utilize this energy plan, because that platform of energy really does touch every aspect of that community. So maybe there's a way for Department of Energy to kind of address it from that perspective. I know we talked about this yesterday, but maybe there's a little bit more we could do to that curriculum that will really train those people to realize whoever's going in and helping them with their community energy planning can actually create like a baseline community plan for that leadership to kind of run with.
The community identifies guiding principles for how they want everybody to interact with them. They set the stage for everything, and it's driven by them. But I really think we really need to have that comprehensive, organized approach to bring all of this together. And I'm a community planner, so I believe in that process. But you know, and then you organize all the projects. And when you go through the planning process and you identify goals and objectives, through the whole process, the end product is implementation. And how do you implement that plan? You do it through projects. So that's how you tie it all together.
So with your funding,
And that's happening.
And yours is happening in Kivalina, and yours is happening in Kivalina. So instead of having multiple, that's basically the goal here. We all go into communities and have community meetings separately to kind of coordinate those projects that are already working in Kivalina and active.
Absolutely.
So maybe at the next community meeting, that could be the model project. You could show the community that the benefits of working together and melding these projects, these active funded projects together, and then ask their input. How could we know what the benefits are going to be to us, but what do you think the benefits are going to be to you? And that, we have CCHRC, NTC, and the state of Alaska all going into one community. How do we get weatherization part of that component? How do we get, make it all happen cohesively instead of, and obviously I'm a planner too, so, the planning process this is how this discussion came about. I go into communities and I talk about energy. Well, I realize that energy is a huge platform. Now I'm talking about housing, now I'm talking about water, sewer, I'm talking about renewables, I'm talking about everything. And my job with AEA was to go talk about energy. Well, how did I end up in this whole, because it touches everything in that community. But without effective planning and a living document for that community to feel a part of, it just becomes a piece of paper on someone's shelf. So that was our goal with AEA, was how do we create these living active documents? You're going in to do comprehensive planning. The Department of Energy wants to do community energy planning. There's no reason why they should be two separate things.
Right.
You're asking the same questions. You're asking the same community level questions. So are you, and so are you. What do you need? What are your issues?
So, I don't know your name, but you mentioned the database and how it used to be used. I don't know how we would get everyone to use something, but how do we get everyone to use something? If we had a database and we had your strategic plan there and AEA's strategic plan, and everyone could go there and see it, because it was all there for that community. We had a community organized database. Let's just say we had it. I don't know where the money's gonna come from. I don't know who's gonna organize it. But then, how do we get everyone to actually use it and keep it updated?
You hire somebody to run the program, and they
No,
can
no,
call
because all of our individual organizations need to be mandated, need to be told that we have to keep this. It needs to come from higher than us, so that the bosses of every organization say to all their employees, we're going to keep this database organized. I mean, that's really how we can get a database that works. Because what we're trying to do is organize a whole bunch of independent, moving items. And then the other problem that we have is money. We have all these projects that need to be done, but we don't have enough money to do them all.
I think that's the key point here. I mean, there's a fundamental disconnect between planning and funding. And I mean, you're talking about a pretty, I mean, there's different ways that could go back, and if you can, you know, just wave a wand and create a new system, I'm sure there's a better way to do it than the way we currently have. Now, I don't think that's realistic, but at least in the short term, maybe in a long-term process. But I think this has to be community driven. I think it has to be capacity built at community level, because the way projects are funded, the only person who's gonna have a vested interest in knowing what's being done at the community level is the community itself. And I mean, just maybe I'm not looking at this the right way, but I mean, there's no way I'm going to stay on top of every project in every community in this state.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I have 10 people in my division, and we have a lot of different, you know, I mean, I think a lot of other agencies could probably be somewhat sympathetic there, but I mean, I think that there has to be a huge amount of capacity building in having, and maybe it's having an increase in planning or having a clearinghouse at a community level. But if you know, communities who are successful in developing generally are those who know how to play the system and know who the stakeholders are and know who to call, whether it's me or whether it's somebody else or Jack and that's the difference between communities who are successful in getting projects accomplished and those that aren't. And it really comes down to capacity at the community level. And I mean, creating new systems and databases, I mean, sure, there's probably some good projects there. I think that, you know, there's far more databases and technologies that are used for a year and then go by the wayside. And at least in my mind, I really think it's just the organization and the ownership and empowerment at the community level to really have an understanding of who the stakeholders are, so that they can take a leadership role in roping people in as needed. Because otherwise, I mean, how do you even fund a project? A lot of communities in this state are, the whole thing is, you know, it's a cultural center or whatever it may be. It's going to be the tourism's going to rally around this one initiative, and that's their economic development plan for a decade. And the rest of it's basic infrastructure. And I'm coming at this from an economic development standpoint. And maybe one thing gets funded, and maybe only one thing gets funded every 5 years. So, I mean, it's a challenge. And for those communities that are successful enough to actually figure out how to pull in different sources and maybe create more linkages between the programs so that they have a more holistic approach. I mean, it seems like that's the best strategy, and there's still not enough money to go around. But I don't know. It's hard for me to wrap my head around it, to be perfectly honest.
Well, I totally agree, and you know, coming from a community perspective, because I'm the one with boots on the ground in lots of communities all over the state, I'm hearing the same thing. And it doesn't matter if there are regions that have money or regions that don't have money. It's the same thing. They feel disconnected, but most of them don't have a plan. I think you know, that's where we need to start. Take your project and wrap them around and rally and start infusing housing and weatherization and all this stuff into one community, so that when we're done with this process in a year, we could say it can be done. And it's a state success story if you have one community, and now you say, you know what, we derived 10 projects that are coming out of this planning effort and this one little toilet project, but we're gonna phase them out over a period of 5 years so that we can look at assess that community, because now you've been in there, you know what equipment's there. I could walk through Kivalina in 2 minutes. I know what's there. You're gonna know what's there, you're gonna know what's there. You're gonna look at the housing. Jack, I know you do what I do. I walk through Barrow and I go, inefficient. No. You know, you look at things and you see. So you're making visual assessments. You're looking at a house and that water and sewer connection. You know what that is. I don't. But now you have this good assessment of that community, whether it's a technical assessment or not. That needs to be brought to the table when you're planning, because the people who live in those houses, they might not know what's causing the inefficiency or how inefficient it is. They know nothing about the water and sewer except their toilet either flushes or it doesn't. So it's our job to bring all that to the table when we're helping them with community planning. I think this is a good project to kind of share with Kivalina and see if they're willing to embrace it.
You know what I don't see here is the Department of Labor and Career and Technical Education and Workforce Development. 'Cause you're talking 5, 10 years out, you're talking at grade school kids, graduating school, you wanna keep them in your village, teach them, give them a trade, give them a job. That's gonna help with that project when it gets there. So if you're gonna start bringing people to the table, that's what I'd start looking at, workforce development, AWIB, CTE. I just left the CTE conference yesterday, and there's some great stuff happening there. And that's where the future's gonna lie, is with the kids, and teaching them how to plan, be involved in the community, be the guys that are gonna take his job when he retires, my job when I retire, okay?
My job when I'm not able to get
That's
on the
right.
plane anymore.
So, that would be my last suggestion for pulling stuff together.
That is great, and I think that we all would benefit from that. One of the things that we brought into regional energy planning is going into the schools and doing 6th grade level engagement. What we found out is that educational component, we had the same uninformed audience at the community level. So we realized that we had a whole community now that just didn't understand energy. But they came to our meetings and listened and learned. That makes a big difference. So I totally agree with you. Those are people that need to be added to the list.
Yeah, just to follow up on his point, I think it's important for us to be as inclusive as possible at the beginning. Because you're gonna get a lot more buy-in from labor or anybody else we're talking about if they're sitting at the table right now with us putting this together than they are 2 months from now or 6 months from now when we call them and say, hey, we've had this effort going on for 6 months and we think you'd be a part of it. You're gonna see a lot more skepticism of somebody kind of coming in after the fact than they would if they were sitting here at the genesis of it.
So I'm gonna offer that to you to feed us with that information. CCHRC has sent out all the emails. If you have suggestions with a list of agencies that you think need to be at the table, send them in. I think that moving forward that we could probably utilize this, our regional energy efforts, our Department of Energy Community Energy Planning, their comprehensive resiliency plan, and then wrap these projects into that process. I think it can work. Now, of course, it has to have community buy-in. So that's going to be your job as agencies to embrace that community and create that network so that, whether they want it or not, maybe they don't want to be the project. Maybe you have another community in Utah that's going to move forward that maybe they want to be the project.
Well, this has already been vetted with the communities that are doing it, and then Kivalina said yes, that they wanted this process, so that's done.
Okay. Well, I meant with the wrapping your project
sure.
around other
Okay.
projects, yeah. So building upon your project, with this concept of a holistic perspective.
Well, one of the things I think you could take away from this meeting is there are possibly tools that are either underused or not fully developed, whether it's a Rapids database or something else. But if anybody's getting ideas, we ought to be looking at those from the standpoint, can all these groups and agencies and organizations either support them financially and or whatever else has to be needed to make them a tool that we can use.
So at this point, we're all volunteering, we all have all these ideas. We really are gonna have to pony up somehow among us all to get someone with some talent herding these cats into a form that we can send out to the collective group for comments and additions so that this starts to become something more than a lot of great ideas. Now, we might have a project, we might not, but we're gonna need somebody to start organizing this, and so how do we get there?
I'd like to speak to that a bit with regard to the database, because it is, as we've heard here, really about common articulation through common data. You know, there's dozens of types of projects that we've talked about, and there are multiple years. And my experience is, and I'm actually working with a complex group, around database, that the design of it came from the users. So I think that both agencies and planners are part of looking at an existing database and building it out together with database folks. And that becomes the framework of it. I think it's essential that one is put in place and that it's scalable, both at the community level and at the regional level, and then essential as you scale it up, because state funders and federal funders are gonna increasingly demand this. And we deserve to also know what's happening in our state in a multiple year fashion, because it's not just people sitting around the table and wanting to know who's missing in 2 months or 3 or 6 months. It's what does this look like over a 10-year period? And so I've seen it at work. In fact, I work directly with a group who, it's comprised of volunteers who come to the table and work on the data sets, and here it's, around water and sewer, roads, housing, resource development, infrastructure, what's going on in our region over time. And I would just assert that that's something that within this room can come together. I mean, the one that I work with is Pipeline Open Data Standards. It's a global organization. And I'm herding the cats. That's kind of my job to just, move them forward. But I see it directly applicable to what we're talking about here. And it came from the users, it came from the owners, pipeline operators. But the same thing could be said for here. And, that kind of accountability is gonna be required, and you only get it from common data sets.
Okay, well, we need to wrap up, everybody has to leave, but I think that the takeaway today will really be to kind of figure out where we go next. I really would like some feedback from you as agencies to kind of help direct that. And then even if we have to do it electronically for a while, and then see if, if Kivalina embraces that concept of a holistic approach, then we'll have something to work with and start building that, maybe re-energize look at that rapid, and if that database is not useful, it's something we're working with AEA, maybe ADA is the financer of all these capital projects in these communities. Maybe they have the capacity at some place to start looking at consolidating these databases so that we could have a clearinghouse for that information. Maybe it's not a funded position yet, but maybe that's a good idea for them to approach the governor with, that this is something that's gonna benefit not only the state, but it's gonna benefit every Alaskan that we touch. That approach has to come from everybody. So I think what we need to do is really solidify our contact list, add the people who need to be here to that list, see if Kivalina will embrace as a pilot project, and then build from that. It's easier to build from something that's happening because you have a tangible end product that you could say, here's our success.